All right, so stay with me, guys. This is 11 honors, and we're just talking about the schedule. Just a reminder for you, so if you want to check this, the quiz Wednesday, vocabulary, the book is due Thursday, there'll probably be a quiz with that. I have a bunch of things to give you during the period. And the Frankenstein test next week. There will be a test on Walden. It's hard to read. That's why we're doing it together. So if you would get that out and get the questions, we're not even going to read the entire first chapter. It's 75 pages. I don't think we need to. But we're going to read about 5 or 6 other chapters. So it'll take us a couple of weeks. We won't spend a terribly long amount of time. But if you will get that out, and we will begin. Yeah.
I get a Walden book.
Yeah. 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 I don't know if you have these. I think I need to give you. One more page, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
Yeah. I have all that, yeah. I will give it to you, I have all that.
So, 6:45. 6:45.
4 months.
Which number are we on?
I have to look at it.
You got like this. Maybe it's just like straight up meat and cheese and big old guys and then 2 chicken queso.
I don't know, it doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think you have anything to do with music. I don't really like it.
Having fun now? Enjoying yourself here? Yes. I'm glad.
All right, so we've actually done, we should be, guys, we should be on the second page of the questions.
I don't think they answered 45. That's gonna be the outlet. I gotta get out of here. I gotta leave.
All right, so we should be through page 18 maybe. What page does yours start on? What is the very first? Is it number page 1 or is it?
Page 7.
All right, so.
We have page 13, right?
I think we're on page 12. I tell you what, we're at the bottom of page 13. So we've answered the questions on the first page. We haven't done number 7. So we're on number 7. Why don't we start with Jackson, if you would start reading for us.
page 13?
That's correct. Try to read about 30 minutes, if that's all we have. Try to get something done.
Let us consider for a moment what most of the trouble and anxiety which I have referred to is about, and how much is it necessary that we be troubled or at least careful. It would be some advantage to live a primitive and frontier life, though in the midst of an outward civilization, if only to learn what are the gross necessaries of life and what methods have been taken to obtain them, or even to look over the old day books of the merchants to see what it was that man most commonly bought at the stores, what they stored, that is, what are the grossest groceries, for the improvements of ages have had but little influence on the essential laws of man's existence, as our skeletons probably are not to be distinguished from those of our ancestors.
Why don't we go this way? So he's about to give you one of the basic questions, question number 7. He's going to give you what he thinks are the 4 necessary things in life to just stay alive. He's not talking about spiritual things. He's talking about basic physical necessities. Well, what would those be? He's going to tell us, in his opinion, what those are. It's kind of fascinating. His whole principle is that life is best when lived simply. So he's trying to work his way to the point where his life is simple, and physically anyway, he covers just the bare necessities. Then he can have time to do what he thinks man should be doing, that is contemplating and reading and, maybe praying, things like that. But you have to take care of your physical needs, and so he's trying to figure out what they are. We'll go to right here, Simon.
By the words necessary of life, I mean whatever of all that man obtains by his own exertions has been from the first, or from long use has become so important to human life that few, if any, whether from savageness or poverty or philosophy, ever attempt to do without it.
All right. I don't know if you need to just underline all that, but bracket that. That was his definition. His necessities or necessary of life, all that man obtains by his own exertion, that is so important to human life that you simply can't do without it. That's really his definition. It's the basic things that you cannot live without. You cannot be alive. You cannot physically be alive without these 4 things. All right? And he'll give them to you, and then he'll go into some detail about it.
To many creatures there is in this sense but one necessary of life, food. To the bison of the prairie it is a few inches of palatable grass with water to drink, unless he seeks the shelter of the forest or the mountain's shadow. None of brute creation requires more than food and shelter.
Right, why don't you underline that? He says some creatures only need those 2 things, food and shelter. He's going to expand it a little bit for men, but go ahead.
The necessaries of life for man in this climate may, accurately enough, be distributed under the several heads of food, shelter, clothing, and fuel.
Okay, that's it right there. He's going to go into some detail to explain why those 4, if you have those 4 things, food, shelter, clothing, and fuel, those are absolutely necessary to be alive. Yeah.
What is fuel?
He's going to explain that. I'll let him explain it. But in his case, well, you could argue that food is fuel. He kind of does to some degree, but he does talk about warmth, like fire and those kinds of things. But keep going.
For not till we have secured these are we prepared to entertain the true problems of life with freedom and a prospect of success. Man has invented not only houses but clothes and cooked food, and possibly from the accidental discovery of the warmth of fire and the consequent use of it, at first a luxury, arose the present necessity to sit by it. We observe cats and dogs acquiring the same in the second nature. By proper shelter and clothing, we legitimately retain our own internal heat. But with an excess of these, or of fuel, that is, with an external heat greater than our own internal, may not cookery properly be said to begin? Darwin, the naturalist, says of the inhabitants of Tierra del Fuego that while his own party, who were well clothed and sitting close to a fire, were far from too warm, These naked savages, who were farther off, were observed, to his great surprise, to be streaming with precipitation perspiration and undergoing such a roasting. So, we are told, the New Hollander goes naked with impunity, while the European shivers in his clothes. It is impossible to combine the hardiness of these savages with the intellectualness of the civilized man. According to Liebig, man's body is a stove, and food the fuel which keeps us the internal combustion in the lungs. In cold weather we eat more, and warm less. The animal heat is the result of a slow combustion, and disease and death take place when this is too rapid, or for want of fuel, or from some defect in the draught, the fire goes out. Of course, the vital heat is not to be confounded with fire, but so much for an analogy. It appears, therefore, from the above list, that the expression animal life is nearly synonymous with the expression animal heat. For while food may be regarded as the fuel which keeps up the fire within us, and fuel serves only to prepare that food or to increase the warmth of our bodies by addition from without, shelter and clothing also serve only to retain the heat thus generated and absorbed.
There's a lot of what he says that, I get it, and I don't try to dig too deep into it, maybe because I don't understand it. But he just talked about fuel. I thought the example was fascinating. He mentioned Darwin. This is 1845, and we don't think of Darwin until later in the century. You know who Darwin was, right? Evolution and all that. But he looks at Darwin just from an experience that Darwin had. He said they were in the equator, and at night, and the sailors, the Europeans, were shivering, sitting around a fire. They were fully clothed and were still cold. The natives were much further away from the fire, with almost no clothes on, and were sweating. He said even the idea of fuel, even the need for fire, is kind of relative. So he says the food produces fuel, or food is the fuel that keeps our internal body warm. But we need it sometimes to stay warm in colder climates, also to have cooked food. I guess he's saying that really you could live without cooked food. We'll keep reading. All right.
The great necessity then for our bodies is to keep warm, to keep the vital heat in us. What pains we accordingly take not only with our food and clothing and shelter, but with our beds, which are our night clothes, robing the nests and breasts of birds to prepare the shelter within a shelter. As the mole has its bed of grass and leaves at the end of its burrow, the poor man is wont to complain that this is a cold world, and to cold no less physical than social. We refer directly to a great part of our ails. The summer in some climates makes possible a man a sort of Elysium.
Oh, Elysium. Where the heroes go in Greek literature when they die.
Elysium life. Fuel except to cook his food is then unnecessary. The sun is his fire, and many of the fruits are sufficiently cooked by its rays. While food generally is more various and more easily obtained, and clothing and shelter are wholly or half unnecessary. At the present day, and in this country, as I find by my own experience, a few implements, a knife, an axe, a spade, a wheelbarrow, etc., and for the studios, lamplights, stationery, and access to a few books, right next to necessaries, and can all be obtained at a trifling cost. Yet some, not wise, go to the other side of the globe, to barbarous and unhealthy regions, and devote themselves to trade for 10 or 20 years, in order that they may live. That is, keep comfortably warm, and die in New England at last. The luxuriously rich are not simply kept comfortably warm, but unnaturally hot, as I implied before. They are cooked, of course, a la mode.
Well, he talks about the idea that, beds and covers are just an extra. We already have clothes. Now we have covers on us, and then we have a house around us. So think of all the different ways we get sheltered, and even fuel to cook is really the only purpose is to cook food. There's really no other reason. Do you need a fire? Do you need heat if you've got clothes? If you got enough clothes, your body produces enough heat. The reason we mention that is because he's trying to get down what is basically necessary. Because some things we think is necessary. Maybe it's living in a 3-story house. I don't know what it might be. Maybe it's the fanciest clothes you can buy. He's trying to say that he doesn't need those things. If you wanted to spend time doing what's really important, that would not be worth living for. just to buy a bigger house or a bigger car. He's trying to figure out what really is life worth. Why do we live life? Now, I don't know if he's a Christian. We know the answer to that. But anyway, it's fascinating to watch him or hear him argue. Let's keep going. You read the next one, Walden. Most of the luxuries.
Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable but positive hindrances of the elevation of mankind. With respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest has ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. The ancient philosophers, Chinese, Hindu, Persian, and Greeks, were a class in which none has been poor in outward riches, none so rich in inward. We know not much about them. It is remarkable that we know so much of them as we do. The same is true of the more modern reformers and benefactors of the race. None can be an impartial or wise observer of human life, but from the vantage ground of what we call voluntary poverty, of a life of luxury, the fruit is luxury, whether in agriculture, commerce, or literature or art. There are nowadays professors of philosophy, but not some philosophers. Yet it is admirable to profess because it was once admirable to live. To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not theoretically, but practically.
Would you underline that? It said to be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. That's what he would define as a philosopher, not someone who just had thoughts, but had actions to back them up. Also, he noticed at the top, he said, with respect to luxuries and comforts, underline this, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor. He says most of the wisest men that have ever lived have chosen voluntarily to be poor. Think about Jesus. He didn't have what foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He didn't own a house. He was God of the universe, but he didn't own a house. I don't know where he spent the night. He had to spend the night in other people's houses or outside. But once he became, an adult and began his ministry, and of course he is the epitome of wisdom. He's the author of wisdom. If you think about like Mahatma Gandhi, people who really go down in history, maybe Socrates, I don't know much about them personally, Aristotle, but they chose to be poor. Think about that. If the wisest men in history choose poverty, why do we, who are not nearly as wise, choose wealth and luxury? Maybe if they're wise and they choose poverty, maybe there's something wise about living simply, and if there's something unwise about wealth, pursuing wealth, per se, that would make sense. So anyway, that's his argument. And this is an important chapter, passage to keep reading.
The success of great scholars and thinkers is commonly a courtier-like success. Not kingly, not manly, they make shift to live merely by conformity, practically as their fathers did, and are in no sense the progenitors of the nobler race of men. Well, why do men degenerate ever? What makes families run out? What is the nature of luxury which inebriates and destroys nations? Are we sure that this age is even in the outward form of this
All right,
life?
go back. Are we sure you left out a line?
Are we sure that there is none of it even in our own lives? The philosopher is in advance of his age, even in the outward form of his life. He is not fed, sheltered, clothed, warm like his contemporaries. How can a man be a philosopher and not maintain his vital heat by better methods than other men?
We'll keep going. Go ahead. Okay.
When a man is warmed by the several modes which I have described, what does he want next? Surely not more warmth of the same kind. As more richer food, larger, and more splendid houses, finer and more abundant clothing, more numerous things which are necessary to life, there is another alternative than to obtain the superfluities, and that is to adventure on life now. His vacation from humbler toil having commenced the soil, it appears.
Are you losing your pain?
What? Oh, yeah.
This is hard work, I know.
Is
See if you can hang it.
Let's go.
Keep going.
Is suited to the seed, for it has sent it radical downward. Wait, yeah. It's radical downward, and it may now send its shoot upward also with confidence. Why has man rooted himself thus firmly in the earth, but that he may rise in the same proportion into the heavenly dwelling? For the nobler plants are valued for the fruit they bear at last in the air, and light far from the ground are not treated like the humbler esculents.
It's one of our words.
Though they may be biennials are cultivated until they have perfected their root, and often cut down at top for this purpose, so that most would not know them in their flowers.
So in the next sentence, he's going to tell us who he's writing this book for. Go to Jameson, and we'll come back to this other one.
I long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove, and was still on their trail. Many are the travelers I have spoken concerning them, describing their tracks and what calls they answered to. I have met one or two who had heard the hound and the tramp of the horse, and even seen the dove disappear behind a cloud. And they seemed as anxious to recover them as if they had lost them themselves.
About one more.
To anticipate not the sunrise and the dawn merely, but summer and winter before yet any neighbor was stirring about his business, have I been about mine. No doubt many of the townsmen have met me returning from their enterprise, farmers starting for Boston in the twilight, or woodchoppers going to their work. It is true, I never assisted the sun materially in his rising, but doubt not it was of the last importance only to be present at it.
Okay, look at question number 8. He's basically saying morning is his favorite time. He gets up before other people and he's out before other people are. Why does that seem to be in keeping with the person so far? You don't know much about him, but why would that be keeping with his personality?
It's solitary. He's pretty much the only one up.
Well, that's good. That's a good point. Plus, he's so optimistic. He's always about beginnings. Like morning is sort of the symbolic of optimism because, you know, the day hasn't happened yet. You've got the whole day in front of you. So he's always thinking optimistically. He's incredibly optimistic. Why don't we go to Robbie?
So many autumn day and winter days spent outside the town trying to hear what was in the wind. To hear and carry it expressed, I will not have sunk all my capital in it, lost my own breath into the bargain. Running in the face of it, it had concerned either of the following political parties depending upon it. It would have appeared in the Gazette with the earliest intelligence. At other times, watching from the observatory of some cliff or tree, to telegraph any new arrival, or waiting at evening on the hilltops for the sky to fall, that I might catch something that I thought never caught. And that man of wise would dissolve again in the sun.
We just one more of that next little paragraph.
For a long time, I was a reporter of a journal of no very wide circulation. Its editor has never yet seen fit to print the bulk of my contribution. And as too common with writers, I got only my labor for my pains. However, in this case, my pains were
I want you to underline that, thank you. We'll go to Tucker. Underline this next sentence. It's just, it captures kind of what kind of person he was.
For many years, I was self-appointed inspector of snowstorms and rainstorms, and did my duty faithfully. Surveyor, if not of highways, then of forest paths, and all across lockers, keeping them open, and ravines bridged and passable at all seasons, where the public view and testify to their utility.
And the next one, and then we'll kind of summarize that.
I have looked after the wild stock in your town, which give a faithful herdsman a good deal of trouble by losing fences. And I have had an eye to the improvements of nooks and corners of the farm, though I do not always know whether Jonas or Solomon worked in a particular field today. Though it is none of my business, I have watered the red huckleberry, the sand cherry, and the nettle tree, the red pine and the black ash, the white grape and the yellow violet, which might have withered else in dry seasons.
So it's hard to explain, you know, what kind of person he is, but we can learn a lot from his behavior. Look what he says. Underline, I think you underlined this. For many years I was appointed inspector of snowstorms and rainstorms and did my duty faithfully. Now that's not really a job, is it? Just to go out and watch it snow, or to go out and watch it rain. And then he said he looked after the wild stock. If anybody, he would just walk. And if he saw somebody's cow or somebody's dog, he would put it back where it belonged. So that was actually something positive. But it's not really a job. But this is the way, this kind of person he is. Someone who, you know, this is the life he wants to live. It's so weird and strange compared to ours. Alistair, read.
It was in short.
Yes, it is.
In short, I went on thus for a long time. I may say without boasting, faithfully minding my business, it became more and more evident that my townsmen would not, after all, admit into the list of town officers, nor make my place a censure with a moderate allowance. My accounts, which I can swear to have kept faithfully, I have indeed never got audited, and still less accepted, still less paid and settled. However, I have not set my heart on that.
Okay, before you go on, he basically admits what I just said. He said, I never was able to become like an officer in the town, officer in charge of snowstorms and rainstorms, and making sure the cattle don't get away. You know, he's admitting nobody ever acknowledged that I was doing that, but what I wrote down, I'd like for you to write it. He wants to live his own life, no matter how weird it may seem to you. And the whole book is an explanation of why he chose this life. And so, you know, we know he did other things. He worked at different jobs. He wrote books. I guess he was a writer. But it still seems, you know, he's living differently than most people. He doesn't go to college. Well, he did go to college, but he doesn't get the typical job after college. He's not trying to make a lot of money and buy a big house. Let's see what he says here, Ben. Not long since.
Not long since a strolling Indian went to sell baskets at the house of a well-known lawyer in my neighborhood. Do you wish to buy any baskets, he asked. No, we do not want any, was the reply. What, exclaimed the Indian as he went out the gate. Do you mean to starve us, having seen his industrious white neighbors so well off, that the lawyer had only to believe his arguments and by some magic lull. And standing followed, he had said to himself,
Turn around.
I will go into businesses, I will weave baskets, it is a thing which I can do. Thinking that when he had made the baskets, he would have done his part. And then it would be the white man's to buy them. He had not discovered that it was necessary for him to make it work for others while to buy them. Or at least make him think that it was so, or do something else which it would be worth to buy. I had woven a kind of basket of delicate texture, but I had not made it work anyway. Well,
Ben, why don't you turn around and do what you're supposed to do?
I don't know, got a leader on.
Don't blame him.
Yet not the less in my case did I think it worked. My wow to weave. Instead of studying how to make it work in the wild, to buy
We're not
my
ready.
baskets.
Hey, we're not ready.
Oh,
Keep going.
someone's touching my back. I studied rather how to avoid the necessity of selling. The life which men praise and regard as successful is but one kind. Why should we exaggerate any one kind at the expense of the other?
I'll underline this line in the middle of it. It said he had not, this traveling salesman went around trying to sell baskets and nobody was buying them. Ben, you need to get this too. And the problem was, it says he had not discovered that it was necessary for him to make it worth the others while to buy them, or at least make him think that it was so, or to make something else which it would be worth his while. In other words, if you make something, well, you shouldn't expect people to buy it just because they feel sorry for it. You should make something that people want to buy, and that's the way he kind of approaches life. On Wednesday, we'll have a quiz. It's not an easy book. We're going to have to do a little better job kind of focusing and paying attention. We're not going anywhere yet. Guys, we're not ready to go. You guys just stay over here. We'll wait till the announcement. We're not ready to go.
I really hope those soundbite that you had.
I'm using my index.